Everybody's going to walk away a genius. Anyway, everybody sitting, almost. Hi, everybody. In a few minutes, we're going to see a presentation from Dr. Dean Ornish. Dean couldn't be with us today because he is just arriving home from London. He has just been on a terrific speaking tour where he was on the Ellen DeGeneres show, and then he flew to Maui and was interviewed by Oprah, and then went on to London to talk over his new clinical trial and what he's doing with Prince Charles. And he's just arriving home today, so he couldn't be with us, but he sent a 4 or 5 minute video. And it is all about what we're going to see in a few minutes, his clinical trial to reverse Alzheimer's, which nobody had quite tried in this way. And we're then going to hear from Louie Psihoyos, the great documentary filmmaker, who is going to, I believe, document the ability to reverse Alzheimer's using lifestyle medicine only. So let's see, do we have Dean's video, please?
Hi, I'm Dr. Dean Ornish, and I'm delighted to join you here today at the ASPENBRAINLAB conference. I'm so sorry that I can't be with you in person, but at this moment I'm on a plane returning from London. And I appreciate so much the kind invitation from Glenda Greenwald to participate virtually in this way, as well as her vision in setting up this extraordinary conference. You know, for the last 42 years, I've directed a series of randomized trials and demonstration projects showing that simple lifestyle changes, what we eat, which is a whole foods plant-based diet, naturally low in both fat and sugar, moderate exercise, various stress management techniques, including meditation and yoga, and psychosocial support, or to put it even more simply, to eat well, move more, stress less, and love more, that these same lifestyle changes can reverse the progression of a wide variety of chronic diseases. We were able to show for the first time that even severe heart disease could be reversed by making these lifestyle changes in a series of randomized trials. These studies have been published in the leading peer-reviewed journals like the Journal of the American Medical Association, the Lancet, the New England Journal of Medicine, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and others. We found that these same lifestyle changes could also reverse high blood pressure, high cholesterol, obesity, type 2 diabetes. We published a study, the first randomized trial, showing that these same lifestyle changes can slow, stop, and even reverse the progression of early-stage prostate cancer. What's true for prostate cancer will likely be true for breast cancer as well. We published a study with J. Craig Venter, who was the first to decode the human genome, that these same lifestyle changes, when you change your lifestyle, it changes your genes, over 500 genes in just 3 months, turning on the genes that keep us healthy, down-regulating the genes that cause us to get sick. We published a study with Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn, who was awarded the Nobel Prize for her pioneering work with telomeres, showing for the first time that these same lifestyle changes can lengthen telomeres and increase telomerase. Telomeres are the ends of our chromosomes that regulate aging. As we get older, our telomeres get shorter, and as our telomeres get shorter, our lives get shorter, and the risk of premature death from pretty much all diseases, including Alzheimer's disease, goes up proportionate. We found that we could actually increase the telomerase by 30% in just 3 months, and over a 5-year period, we found that we could actually lengthen telomeres. And when we published this in the Lancet, the editors called it reversing aging at a cellular level. And so the more diseases we study and the more underlying biological mechanisms we look at, the more reasons we have to show why these simple changes are so powerful and how quickly people can get better. My wife Ann and I, we've worked together for over 20 years, published a new book called Undo It, and it presents a radical unifying theory, which is that, I was trained, like all doctors, to view heart disease and diabetes and Alzheimer's disease and prostate cancer as fundamentally different, with different diagnoses, different treatments, and yet I've come to realize that they're really the same disease manifesting and masquerading in different forms. Because in all of these studies, we found it was the same diet and lifestyle intervention, eat well, move more, stress less, and love more, that could reverse the progression of all of these. And so, since Alzheimer's is caused by the same mechanisms, chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, changes in telomeres and gene expression, in the microbiome, in apoptosis and angiogenesis, and so on, that cause all these other chronic diseases. I believe that we're at a place with Alzheimer's very similar to where we were 40 years ago when we first showed that heart disease was reversible. In other words, the epidemiological data, the data from less intensive interventions like the finger study, for example, have shown that less intensive interventions may slow the rate of progression and maybe even stop the rate of progression of early stage Alzheimer's disease. Very much like less intensive interventions 40 years ago could slow the rate of progression of coronary heart disease. I believe, at least our hypothesis is, that a more intensive intervention may actually reverse it. And as you know, there are no effective, highly effective drugs for treating or for preventing Alzheimer's. So if we can actually show we can reverse the progression, then that'll, first of all, give millions of people new hope and new choices, but it will also have implications for prevention as well and early detection. And a lot of people don't want to know if they're at risk for Alzheimer's because they think there's nothing they can do about it. James Watson, who famously decoded the structure of DNA, was one of the first people to have his genome sequenced. And he said, I want to know everything except the ApoE4 gene, which is linked to Alzheimer's, because why would I want to know if I'm at high risk for something that I can't do anything about? And so both from a prevention standpoint as well as a therapeutic standpoint, if we can show in this randomized trial that we can reverse it, that'll be really thrilling. And so we're in the midst of the study now. We're taking 100 men and women who have early to moderate Alzheimer's disease, and we're randomizing them into two groups. We're doing the study in collaboration with Dr. Bruce Miller and Joel Kramer, who run the Memory and Aging Center at UCSF, Dr. Catherine Madison at California Pacific Medical Center. They're doing the cognitive function testing, as well as changes in hippocampal volume to look at whether we're having an effect on that. We're working with Dr. David Sinclair at Harvard, who has the Sinclair lab that's doing the gene expression and the proteomic studies. We're working with Dr. Elizabeth Blackbird again, doing the telomere studies, and with Dr. Rob Knight at UCSD, who's doing the microbiome studies, and Steve Horvath at UCLA, who's doing something called the DNA clock, a measure of aging. So we'll have not only looking at the primary endpoint, which is whether or not cognitive function improves, but also, if it's so, why and to whether there's any correlation between the degree of change in lifestyle and the degree of cognitive improvement, if any, that we measure. So I'm more excited about this study than anything I've done in a long time. These 100 men and women will be randomized to two groups. They'll both be tested with all these tests at baseline. One group, the experimental group, will get this intensive intervention for 4 months. And it's the same intervention that we're using in our study, in our demonstration projects, and that Medicare is now reimbursing in hospitals and clinics around the country for people with heart disease. It's an hour of supervised exercise, an hour of meditation and yoga, an hour of a support group, and an hour of a group meal with a lecture. And on the Medicare, we do that twice a week. On the Alzheimer's study, we're doing that 3 times a week for 4 months, and then we'll repeat the testing in both groups. Then the control group, who wasn't getting the intervention, will cross over. They'll receive it now for 4 months. The experimental group will get it for 4 additional months for a total of 8 months, and then we'll test them a 3rd time. And I'm really, as I say, hoping that we can show this, but whatever we show, it'll be important, because if we show that we can actually reverse the progression, as I mentioned, that will give millions of people around the world new hope and new choices. And I have a personal interest in this because my mother and many of her siblings died of Alzheimer's disease. But even if we show that it doesn't work, that'll be important for people to know as well. And so Louie Psihoyos is doing a documentary where he's filming these patients all the way through. He got an Academy Award for his first film called The Cove. Racing Extinction was seen by over 4 billion people. And we can capture things in a film that we can't show in a journal article. And the process of what people are going through is, to me, so much more interesting than just hearing them talk about it in retrospect. And so if you're interested in the study and supporting it, if you're interested in the film and supporting it, it'll be a way of leveraging your resources to hopefully shine a light in the darkness and to help us empower people with information that whatever we show will be critically important. So thank you for this opportunity for me to be here today. And most of all, Glenda, thank you for this opportunity as well. Thank you.
That was really great from Dean. And I'd like to introduce Louie Psihoyos now. I think you've heard a lot about him, but He is one of the greatest award-winning documentary film directors. His first documentary, The Cove, which was about the mass killing slaughter of dolphins in Japan, won 100 awards globally, including the Oscar for Best Documentary Feature in 2009. It was amazing because of the activism that it was inspired by the film, and helped reduce these dolphin deaths by thousands per year. And one of the great things Louie did, the next film, Racing Extinction, was seen by 36 million people in over 220 countries. And Louie projected from that film the beautiful pictures of endangered species on the United Nations, the Empire State Building, and the Vatican. So these images in that film were seen over 5 billion times and became the top trending global event on Facebook at the time. His third film, Game Changers, will be very interesting to Aspen people. It documents elite athletes on a plant-based diet, really, really vegan, and busts the myths that meat-centric diet is optimal for strength, endurance, virility, and recovery. And Louie is currently working on a film about the clinical trial that you just heard about. And Dean is trying to prove that the same therapy that he has used to reverse heart disease, diabetes, and early prostate cancer can now, in a revolutionary way, reverse Alzheimer's. Louie, come and tell us about the film.
Well, they say a good documentary tells, but a better one shows. So why don't you roll that tape? I'll just show a little bit about what Glenda and Dean were talking about. Just watch a few-minute video. My name is Louie Psihoyos. I'm the Executive Director of OPS, the Oceanic Preservation Society. I was a photographer for National Geographic magazine for almost 20 years. The first story I proposed to photograph for them was on garbage. About 15% of America saw it, enough to help start a tipping point, and recycling began to take off. It was back then that I began to see the power of imagery combined with a compelling story could help change the world. The first documentary we did, The Cove, was about the killing of dolphins in Japan. At the time, they were killing about 23,000 dolphins and porpoises a year for human consumption. That film became the most awarded documentary in history and the first doc to sweep all the film guilds. But more importantly, it created change. Because of the continued activism around that film, every year the number of dolphins killed in Japan declines. Last year, they killed 610, a 97% drop. We realized the film could work on this issue. Maybe we could scale it up to help solve one of the biggest problems of our time. The second film we made was called Racing Extinction. We're at the brink of what scientists call the Anthropocene, the sixth major extinction in the history of the planet. We're at this turning point right now where our generation is the last one that can affect the change we need to prevent a mass extinction. Racing Extinction was viewed by 36 million people in 220 countries and territories in just the first day. Through our educational campaign, 44,000 teachers showed our film to 2.5 million school children. All over America, kids began to take action in their schools and their communities. Working with organizations like the United Nations and the World Bank, we created large-scale projection events around the world and began to call attention to mass extinction at a scale way beyond anyone's imagination. We projected endangered species onto the Empire State Building, and within a week, we reached over 1 billion people. The issue became the top trending story on Facebook and Twitter for 4 days worldwide. I thought we couldn't get any more attention than that, and then the Pope called. He invited us to project onto the Vatican during COP21. He wanted to remind world leaders that more was at stake with climate change than humanity. 225,000 people saw that event live. 600 media outlets were there, and within days, we reached over 4.4 billion people. The projections helped create legislation in the US that bans some of the world's most endangered species from being trafficked through Western ports. With the last film I directed, The Game Changers, we're turning our attention onto the biggest change people can make to save the world and themselves: what they eat.
I ate a lot of meat. They showed us commercials
Steak. That's what a man eats.
selling that idea that real men eat meat.
Serious man food.
But you got to understand, that's marketing. That's not based on reality.
I've been teaching fighting techniques to government agencies for more than 15 years. Then I got injured. Unable to teach for at least 6 months, I spent more than 1,000 hours studying science on recovery and nutrition, and stumbled across a study about the Roman gladiators.
The gladiators were predominantly vegetarian.
How could the original professional fighters be so powerful, eating only plants?
When I made the switch to a plant-based diet, I qualified for my 3rd Olympic team. I broke 2 American records. I was like, man, I should have done this a long while ago.
When I went plant-based, I wasn't sure if I was gonna survive. And I actually became like a machine.
One of the biggest misconceptions in sports nutrition is that we have to have animal protein to perform at a high level. That's just not true.
Sometimes you have to do things that you know your competitors aren't doing.
Today's blood and yesterday's blood.
I think this is going to wake a lot of people up.
I was recovering better, not getting as sore. This was our best season in the last 15 years, and we had 14 guys on plant-based diets.
We all want to feel great, have more energy.
Cholesterol was 276. Today, 169.
Whoa, now you're talking.
Most guys my age can keep up with the grandchildren. My grandchildren can't keep up with me.
It's not one set of dietary guidelines for improving your performance as an athlete, another one for reversing heart disease, reversing diabetes. It's the same for all of them.
Someone asked me, how could you get as strong as an ox without eating any meat? And my answer was, have you ever seen an ox eating meat?
At OPS, we're working with the world's best scientists, doctors, photographers, artists, and filmmakers to move the needle on some of the most urgent issues of our times. There's less than a dozen people that work at OPS. But like Margaret Mead once said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Please join us.
Thanks. Wait, stop. I always tell the crew that we're not making movies, we're trying to start movements. The fundamental difference between like what we do, making documentaries with an impact, and let's say what Hollywood directors and producers are doing is they look at the audience and they look at you as butts and seats. You're $10 in a box of popcorn. I look at the audience as minds and seats. And if you can change a mind, you change somebody's world. But I was always curious, like, how do you change the world? And there's a lot of great science now that shows that you only need 10% of the population to be 100% committed to an idea before you can change the world. And they did this, these studies with looking at the suffragette movement, the civil rights movement, and Arab Spring. And I called it the lead author. And I said, what's with 10%? Why not 6 or 7% or 17%? And he said, sent me back 3 pages of like algorithms, math, and I'm not a math guy. I said, called him back. I said, can you give it to me in like layman's language, you know, like so I can understand it? He said, yeah. So it's like if you're trying to create steam, you can't do it unless you get water to a boiling point. 10% of the population, 100% are committed to an idea, is the tipping point for social change. And I think that's why what we do works. You know, Mark Twain once said that the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between the lightning and the lightning bug. We have great writers, we have great cinematographers. I've got a pretty good eye. We assemble an all-star team and we get together and we reverse engineer what we're doing from the back end. How do we create social change that we needed? So when we did the Game Changers, we thought, well, why can't people adopt a diet that they know is better for them? It's because guys tend to be in the household. They're not buying the food, but in general, but they're dictating that, like, there's no meat on the plate. So we had to change the male's idea of what is normal, necessary, and natural, and that's the idea of the Game Changer that comes out September 16th. in the course of making that movie, I met Dean Ornish, and I thought, okay, well, I'm not a super athlete. I want to change the world through food. I'm interested in saving animals and the environment, but I realized that if you really want to save the environment and animals, you have to save people too. And the best way to do that is to change what's people's plate. And when I saw Dean lives and works down the street from where I do, and I thought, well, he's trying to reverse Alzheimer's. I'm interested in living a healthy life into old age. Dan Buettner's a good friend of mine. He's the guy that there's a lot of talk about the blue zones here. You know, he's the guy that, well, he didn't discover the blue zones, but he popularized it. And the blue zones, 95% of their calories come from a plant-based diet. And you know, there's slides up here about the hunter-gatherers, but 85% of the calories in the three primary cultures that are isolated from humanity, most of their calories come from a plant-based diet, between 70% and 85%. Why do we call it hunter-gatherers? It should be gather-hunters. And it's usually the women that gather and the men that go out, and it's a social construct. We're not, you know, we said we're going to go out there and get the meat, we're going to go to, you know, get the gazelle, but the men are consuming as many calories as they're bringing back to do that. So we're living with this fallacy that, you know, meat is what gives us energy and sustains us. It's really carbohydrates in plants and vegetables that keeps and maintains our health. There's talk about you know, the antioxidant properties of red meat, if I heard that right, but I mean, iceberg lettuce has more antioxidants than iceberg lettuce. And in general, plant-based foods have 64 times more antioxidant properties than animal-based products. So it's if you want to change the world, you have to change what's on people's plates. So that's we're embedded right now with Dean's study to reverse Alzheimer's. So we started it 40 weeks ago, and he can't talk about it, but I can, because it looks like it's actually working. Some of the early cognitive reports are coming back, and it's like, you know, between 10 and 20%, some of the people are doing better. It's not all assembled, but it looks like it's actually going to work. I'm excited by it because we're at the beginning. And when you start these studies, you get 12 people around a table, and they're scared. They're losing their mind. They don't want to talk. And at Dean's program, and he does crazy stuff. He has them do tango dancing. He has them talking to each other. And you see them coming alive over the course of 40 weeks. They're exercising, they're doing yoga, they're talking to each other, and it's really love and support. Gina was talking about, you know, the importance of love, and we don't talk about that much, but that's absolutely integral. It makes us feel alive. It's like the essence of who we are, is the love and support. So I'm hoping that by bringing this film to you know, millions of people, you know, potentially, that we can, you know, if it's successful as I think it is, we can change the world. Let's see, you know, we spend $3.6 trillion a year on healthcare, and it's really, all the doctors in this room know that that's really sick care, and 80 to 85% of that is preventable. We don't have to die of prostate cancer and breast cancer and diabetes and strokes and heart disease. These are all preventable by what we put in our mouth. And you know, the raising of animals for human consumption causes more direct emissions of greenhouse gases than the entire transportation sector. It's the raising of animals for human consumption is the biggest source of water pollution, air pollution, habitat destruction, species extinction, and it's the biggest cost of chronic diseases. So I'm hoping that if we do this film and it's successful, it's going to get out there in a massive way. Now, we've been doing something quite different than most any filmmaker. We're not interested in making money on it. We'd love to make money on a film, but we realized that if you'd sell it to Netflix, like that would be every documentary filmmaker's, oh God, it's in Netflix. They have 130 million people that get Netflix, 4-person pass around, 600-700 million people have it, but they're not in China, very little in the Middle East, very little in India, and they don't want you to show it in schools unless it's on Netflix. So our model is quite different. We want to independently finance the film so that we can have it on Netflix. We just turned down $3 million for Game Changers from Netflix, but so it's not original, but it'll be on Netflix, but we can still show it in schools. We can still show it at conferences if we want. We can give it away for free. And we took $225,000 as opposed to $3 million. So it just shows you that, you know, we're doing this for altruistic reasons. We're doing this because we want to change the world, and we don't want to be wedded to somebody else's business model, because our business model is changing the world. Anyway, I know my time is about up, but I know Glenda's supporting us. If you want to talk to her about what, you know. Okay. Well, anyway, thanks so much for listening. I appreciate it, and thanks for inviting me. Appreciate it. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Are you coming up to introduce? But I do want to tell you that Aspen Brain Institute, we think it's going to be revolutionary. We support the Dean's clinical trial, and we're especially supporting the film. We would like to be, Aspen Brain Institute is planning to be an executive producer of this film, and anybody that wants to help be a producer, I want to be a producer, come and join us, and if we all join together, I hope we can be an executive producer of this marvelous film that I think if anybody can make this interesting and juicy and revolutionary, Louie Psihoyos can, and we want to support it. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Richard Hodash. I'm a neurosurgeon. So I come at this from I'd like to say the wellness and health side of things, but I've also had a chance to deal with it on the other side of the sickness part of it. I want to thank Glenda. I'm probably the newest member of the board, just went yesterday for the first time, and I want to thank her for being so kind as to invite me on this. My wife and I moved here 2 years ago, and we're enjoying our retirement here, and this is a nice stimulus for me to stay involved in something that I care about passionately. My particular interest was in cerebral vascular disease and stroke-related issues, but the brain is really a fascination to me. It's been my life's work. I feel very privileged to be able to introduce Dr. Adam Gazzaley, and Adam is a very accomplished man. He is MD, PhD neuroscientist who also is an author. As I was checking up, a photographer who was actually shown his photography, and an entrepreneur and inventor of various different tools and that he will probably be talking about. He is currently professor of neurology, physiology, and psychiatry at UC San Francisco. And he has, in the course of his work, developed 2 countries, one of which is Neuroscape and Achille. And I think today he's going to be talking about some of the work that he's done with probably both of these ventures, one of which is produced the first FDA-approved treatment for using a computer-based program. So I think he should go ahead with his presentation, and you'll be fascinated to see what he has to say.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here again. I was here 3 years ago, and it's fun to come back here, meet new people, give you an update. Future Brain, I'm going to be talking a lot about what is going to be coming in the next decade in terms of technology in the brain, but I feel like it's really important to ground it in what's going on right now. And what I've come to view as the most important global challenge we face, and I'll frame why that is in the context of all the other challenges we face, which is enhancing human cognition. And so what does that mean? In terms of assessing and optimizing cognition, and I'm defining that very broadly to include our attention, perception, memory, our reasoning and decision-making, imagination and creativity, emotional regulation, our empathy, compassion, and our wisdom, we're really tragically lacking. We know that over 500 million people around this planet are suffering debilitating effects of anxiety and depression and deficits in attention and memory. And these numbers are growing, especially with dementia in our seniors, but also with attentional and emotion regulation control deficits in our youth. And there are many other pieces to this that I don't really have time to break down, but I've come to view this as really the signs of us humans really being in a global cognition crisis. And as I said, I don't have a lot of time. I want to talk more about the future than the present, but I just recently outlined this in an article that you could look up called The Cognition Crisis. And I would like to propose that this goal of enhancing human cognition be positioned as a grand challenge, on par with the other pressing global priorities. Because if we can't focus our attention in a sustained way and make wise, creative, future-oriented decisions that prioritize others over ourselves, we will never effectively address other complex time-delayed crises like climate change, no matter how much information we acquire. So it's really core to our survival is to advance and evolve the functioning of our minds. Now, fortunately, we have these two giant global institutions that have been around for a long time that should be well positioned to help with this challenge, right? Our education system for healthy developing minds, and then our medical system dealing with cognitive deficits across psychiatric and neurological domains. The problem is that neither of them have really stepped up to address the challenges that we're facing right now. And I view this as due to 5 pervasive but deeply rooted limitations in these institutions. And I just want to break that down very quickly. The first is assessments. We do not use very sophisticated assessments to understand our cognition, whether it's healthy people or people that have impairments. The advances in cognitive neuroscience, which we use in our laboratory at UCSF, have not made it into the clinical world. And we do not assess cognition in young people unless we think they have some type of developmental challenge or learning disability. Otherwise, we just really don't actually understand what's going on in their minds. You can ask a teacher, who's the best kid in your class in math or reading? They know instantly. Who has the best sustained attention, or the best working memory, or the best emotional regulation? They don't know. So there's really a disconnect between the scientific enterprise of understanding cognition and what we do in the real world. But it doesn't prevent us from trying to treat. However, we have very poorly targeted tools to actually increase cognition. In the education domain, which really grew out of the Industrial Revolution, we're still largely focused on transferring information content, but not building the underlying information processing systems that depends upon. And our medical system, for 60 years, has really relied on small molecules to improve cognition. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with that idea, but it just has not proven successful. We cannot target these selectively enough to the underlying computational unit of the brain, which is the neural network. And therefore, we always have to increase our doses to very high levels to get the effects we want, and we get pretty much just as many side effects as we do effects. And this is something that we have just not overcome after decades of trying to. The other problem with both of them is that they're completely non-personalized. Right? We base our prescriptive advice on large population studies that completely ignore all the individual differences of the brains in those studies. And the classroom has been struggling with not leaving a student behind, but not segregating classrooms, not really solving the problem of personalizing the learning process to each of the brains in their classes. Many practitioners, not all, think about these in silos, that you could address something as complex as human depression with a single pill. But probably the biggest problem is that these are open-loop systems, meaning there's a long, sloppy, non-quantitative cycle between how we intervene and how we update that intervention depending on how it works. You take a pill, you go home, you monitor subjectively your own effects and side effects, go back to your doctor, and then we go up or down 5 milligrams, right? That is the art of medicine. And I'd say it is just not good enough. These are not the fine details that we need to refine. These are fundamental problems in our entire global system of improving the function of our minds. I basically did a deep dive into looking at other grand challenges, and you're familiar with them, and they're important. Energy and climate change and water and infectious disease. Nowhere is there one really focused on improving the function of the human mind. Sort of surprising when you think about how important that is for all of those others to be addressed. So let's talk about how we could think about advancing both these systems to have targeted, personalized, multimodal, and closed-loop systems that rely upon better assessments. And what I want to propose to you is one way of doing that is through technology. Now, this is a complicated area. I actually wrote an entire book called The Distracted Mind, Ancient Brains in a High-Tech World. I'm not going to be talking about that at all now, but it's sort of the flip side of this. It's how technology, even from an evolutionary perspective, has really challenged in a fundamental way the function of our brains. It is very real. It is very concerning. But what I'm really fascinated with is how do we flip that story around? How do we start thinking about technology to enhance what makes us human as opposed to diminish us? And this is a really important time to have this conversation because we know emerging in the consumer space is virtual reality, augmented reality, motion capture, smart wearable physiological recording devices, and artificial intelligence and other machine learning algorithms. These are going to have a profound impact on how we interact with the world around us, with each other, and with ourselves. So we can either get out in front of it or try to deal with it after the fact in similar ways that we're trying to now manage social media and other technologies that we created without deeply thinking through its positive but also negative impacts on us. And so why might we think about technology like these, as well as the ones that you all have in your pockets or your hands right now, as tools to improve cognition? How can that even be possible? Well, the devil's in the details, but on the surface, it's really based upon some very fundamental premises of neuroscience that experience is a powerful driving force of human brain plasticity. This is really a non-contentious point in neuroscience. Of course, we have to figure out exactly how best to harness this. But I'd say this is the really exciting potential of technology, to create targeted, directed experiences that maximally harness the brain's plasticity, to enhance our cognition, refine our behavior, and I would say to ultimately elevate our minds. I think that is really the challenge that we have in front of us. So let's break down a little bit about how we might do that. Not all experiences are created equal. The ones that I'm most interested in are what we call closed-loop systems, or I think of as closed-loop experiences. This is probably one of the most important points I have, so I'm just going to pause here and tell you exactly what I mean by that. So a closed-loop system is one where you intervene and record the impact with as low latency as possible. So ideally in real time, you then use that data to refine your intervention. You apply it again, record, and keep cycling over and over again. At each pass through the closed loop, you're becoming more targeted to the outcomes you're trying to achieve. We use closed-loop systems all the time in all sorts of ways in the physical world. The thermostat in this room is a closed-loop system. It's sensing the environment, and it's changing a heating or cooling system to maintain equilibrium. We use very few, basically hardly any closed-loop systems in medicine or in education. There's a couple that are just beginning to enter the world, but we really have not exploited this engineering principle, which has proved so powerful in many other ways. So how do you build a closed-loop system to improve cognition? One way, the way that I've become fascinated with, is through video games. Now, I know there's lots of views about video games. I've given entire one-hour lectures just on video games and the complexity of them and the complexity of views on them. And there's certainly issues around overuse and violence, and I don't want to talk about that right now. I just want to talk about the potential to create a closed-loop system using a video game to change cognition. How do we do that? So here's a cartoon. Your brain is playing a video game, right? It's your brain that plays the game, moves the rest of your body. While that is happening, your behavior is generating performance metrics, like how fast or accurate you are. This can be recorded by sensors on devices, like an accelerometer or a tap screen, to know how you're performing in the moment with no delay. That data can then be fed back through an environment. Both the challenge and the rewards can be updated based upon how you're performing in the moment to give a perfectly tailored, personalized experience based upon your abilities. So the mechanics of the game activate brain networks in a way that we have never accomplished with any other approach. No molecule, no brain stimulation, nothing stimulates a brain network or activates a brain network like an experience. It's why and it's how our brains evolved. So the experience is activated brain networks, and then the closed multitasking performance on the game, 20-year-olds, despite the fact that they believe they're multitasking masters, suffer almost a 30% decrement in their ability to perform these two tasks at the same time. Now, that ability does not just maintain at that level for your entire life and then just plummet in one tragic year when you're 70. What happens is that it plummets every tragic year of your life. That's just the reality. What we found was that after a month of playing this closed-loop video game, our older adults were able to improve their multitasking performance essentially to the level of 20-year-olds. But most importantly, we confirmed the hypothesis that we also improved their attention and their memory on tests that were very different from the training environment. We published this in 2013 in Nature. You know, that's like the cover of Nature. It's being like being on the cover of Rolling Stone for us scientists. And what was most important here was that we started advancing the methodology, that we could move something like an entertainment video game that's custom designed into the world of first science and then practical applications. Okay. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about this company, Achille, that I founded, navigate this really complex relationship between academics and industry. And so I helped start this company, Achille, with folks from the video game industry, folks from the healthcare investment world. And what Achille has now done is taken the core technology that I described to you very briefly, but embedded it in a game environment that's much richer with art, music, story, reward, usability, all these things that lead to a deep, engaging, immersive experience, which I think is absolutely critical, not just for this to be used when we talk compliance, but also the depth of engagement is also important for engaging the plasticity processes that improve function. Now, Achille is very interesting. Although we've been around for years, we've never sold anything. So what we've decided to do is not take this game through a consumer route, but to take it through the medical device pathway. In order to do that, we have been doing, well over a dozen trials in all these conditions that you could read about there. The one that we're most excited about, because it's furthest along, was a phase 3 trial. So that is a prospectively designed, multi-site, randomized, placebo-controlled trial on a video game. And this was with children with ADHD. That trial is now completed, and we showed that we can improve attention in those children relative to a control group. What we're doing now is advancing this through the FDA with the hopes that this would be the first ever cleared digital treatment for ADHD. Right now, we basically have stimulants and the world's first ever prescribable video game. So this is a long process. We're very close, not quite there yet. It's really a de novo pathway. It's a new category of medicine, essentially, that we think of as a digital medicine. And all these other conditions, especially depression and early dementia, are moving along as well. Okay, back to UCSF. My lab changed dramatically. No one wanted to do the basic cognitive neuroscience work. We wanted to do what we think of as translational neuroscience. How do we use the methodology, the insights of neuroscience, couple it with the tech world to create new, more real-world assessments as well as treatments? I don't have time to break this all down. I just want to show you a couple of pictures of what our labs look like. They're not normal neuroscience labs. We're now building these all over the world. 12 more at UCSF, Lausanne, Nice. We're working in Shanghai. My wife Jo sort of leading that sort of global initiative. Super exciting. They look like they might be interactive media labs, and they function like that. But we also record deep dive physiology right outside this door. There's an MRI scanner. On the other side, we could do blood work. This is right in UCSF's clinical research unit. I certainly don't have time to tell you about all the technologies, but obviously there's a big focus on mobile and wireless just because of accessibility. We have a paper in review right now of foster care children in India that have suffered adverse life events playing one of our games, a meditation-inspired video game, that show we could have attention improvements and behavioral benefits even a year later. That's not published yet, but we're very excited about that data because it shows the accessibility of this technology. Also, moving this technology on the assessment side outside of just the clinical domain into classrooms. Remember I said we didn't really understand the cognition abilities of children that weren't diagnosed with different clinical conditions. If we understood it, maybe we could look at these as levers and try to allow every child to ultimately reach their potential if we know where the deficits lie. What we've been doing is also using both virtual reality and motion capture, as I described, to advance even further. So this concept of digital medicine has been an active area of development for us for over the last 8 years. Most people do not know anything about this because it takes us around 2 years to build every one of these games, all of which target different systems. They all bring art, music, story, and reward cycles to create that deep engagement that I described. And they use different output systems, different devices, neural recordings, as well as virtual reality. We just had a paper 2 weeks ago on the left. That's our game Metatrain, that meditation-inspired video game that I described to you was published in Nature, Human Behavior, where we show that we can improve sustained attention in 20-year-olds after 6 weeks of playing a meditation-inspired closed-loop video. Happy to talk more about that later. Where we want to go in the future is bringing all these together, something I think of as neuro-CrossFit training, and not step in that same pathway that we did with the pharmaceutical industry, which is to put silos around every single drug. These are much more effectively engaged in as a collection that's driven by your data in a personalized manner. Now that this is built, we do very deep dives. As I said, double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trials, first of its kind to really understand not just the feasibility and the signal that something important is happening, but also the mechanisms of action so that we can move forward in a more informed way. And then advance this both through our education and our medicine initiatives. And so what I described to you very quickly was targeted, personalized, multimodal, closed-loop approach. So we're really excited. We don't think that this is going to be a replacement to our education or our current medical system, but a perfect accompaniment to it to pick up on many of its current weaknesses. Okay, I have very little time, but I want to step into the future, right? Because this is future brain. So where do we go forward from what I just described? So that might have seemed futuristic to you, but that is like our day-to-day over the last 5 years. Where we want to go is to capture richer data about what's going on in the brain. What you're looking at now is called the glass brain. This is actually my brain. It's a combination of MRI, which you can see the golden fibers, the there is a real-time visualization of my brain activity while I was playing one of our games. So within just 0.2 of a second, we're recording that data with EEG, coupling it with the pre-recorded MRI data, and then allowing a visualization of that data, looking at the different frequencies of brain rhythms. Now, what's most exciting about it, although that's quite a beautiful way to look at the brain, so a physical fitness game, physical fitness meets cognitive fitness, where your challenges are not just driven by cognition, but you move your body in the game, responding with motion capture, we record your heart rate, and then we target you right at the appropriate ability based upon your heart rate, so that we give you the appropriate physical challenge. If we could record your brain activity, as we're showing right now, in real time, we could feed that data into the game engine, and thus create a personalized approach to optimize those neural processing systems that most need to be improved. Right? This is a hypothesis. We think it'll be almost like a surgical approach to improving brain function. We're also using this data to guide brain stimulation using electrical currents. So with that, we're able to show, and we have 3 papers on this, that we can enhance the learning curve. It's pretty crazy. Felt like science fiction, which is why one of our papers is just a replication of the one that came before it, showing that stimulating the brain with an electrical current, we use alternating currents, can seemingly increase the plasticity and the learning response. What we're trying to show now is that it increases the transfer benefits that we've seen. If we have slides, the next one is very visual. No? Okay, well, maybe I'll show you later, but I can tell you right now that we are another company called SenSync. I'll just pull this all together with this conclusion, and I'm happy to show you later. I have my iPad with me. But basically, what I realized is that while we're making big advances on the software side of digital medicine, we don't have what I'd view as the ultimate digital medicine delivery device. And so I basically incubated a company from scratch around 1.5 years ago, and we created this big, beautiful device. It looks almost like a spaceship that you lay in. And what we do there is we stimulate our participants with visual, auditory, sensory, and tactile stimuli. Most of our experiences are built around nature. So what you do is you lay in here, you see, hear, smell, and feel nature experiences. While that's occurring, we're recording your physiology and adjusting the environment based upon your own real-time data. So nothing like this has ever existed before. It's really exciting to have built a prototype that actually lives at the Four Seasons in Hawaii right now. The first positioning of this is essentially as a spa treatment for relaxation and restoration. It's sort of the most practical way of building something that's very expensive quickly, but the ultimate goal is then to take that big device, bring it into medical centers like Neuroscape, and then validate it as a medical device. So maybe for some people, having a mobile app that's accessible is all you need. For other people with deeply challenging post-traumatic stress disorder or depression, this type of system may be more optimized. So that's a little glimpse of the future and the rationale, and I'm excited to keep you all informed on what we're doing. So thank you.
Chapman. She asked me to dispense with her really incredibly long list of credentials as a scientist and as a leader, and instead I'm just going to tell some stories that I have learned about her. When she was a young graduate student, you can hear me. Okay, when she was a young graduate student in neuroscience, which meant studying the pathology of the brain, at the age of 27, she had a big aha moment, and it really changed not only her, but the world. And it was basically that, you know, when you go to the eye doctor and he flicks those lenses, one to the next, to tell you that you're going to have a more serious prescription than you had last time in my case. Basically, she just flicked the lens from brain disease to brain health. And that really became the basis of her entire life's work. She now has a gorgeous institute at the University of Dallas with 150 researchers, beautiful twin towers with neuron chandeliers, and it's quite a place to visit if you get the chance. I'd like to just read how profound that difference was. It was such a change, it was such a dramatic change, she was able to trademark brain health. It wasn't even being used as a term. And today, you've heard it all day long, and this is really now the shape of things to come. But her manifesto, which all of you have on your table, but I'm going to read it just to show how different this path became, is the human mind is the most sophisticated and creative force on the planet. Our brains are resilient, strong, flexible. They can innovate, improvise, adapt, and overcome. How far can we push the boundaries to expand human intellect? And I give you Sandy Chapman.
So, I have a challenge for you. This is about future brain. I want you to think about what do you wish your future brain could do that it can't do now? And I want to hear from you.
Remember names.
Remember names. Is that it?
Memorize bridge convention.
Memorize. That's what we focus on. What? Yes.
Dream lucidly while on the way.
Someone may have a cure for that. What are you most afraid that you won't be able to do that you can do now? Remember, everyone's worried about memory, but what you've heard about today is our brain can do so much more than memory. That's why our machines are helping us. Thank God for technology, right, Adam?
Right.
It can do so much memory, but innovation, creating, algorithmic thinking, that's what I'm going to do. This is what I've dedicated my life to doing. And if you were to see the slide, think about from the systems level all the way down to the molecular level, how you use your brain changes every single system. It is the most powerful thing you can do. So if we can harness this amazing engine right inside our head,